Well, joining me now is my friend Frank Lavin. He has written a terrific book. I guess you could call it a personal memoir, but it's sort of about his professional life working in the Reagan White House. I've even got it here. It's called Inside the Reagan White House by Frank Lavin. And a word of warning, Frank, it loves a good dad pun like I do. So for anybody under the age of 40 listening right now, be prepared for some terrible, corny jokes for both of us, because when the two of us get together, we can feed off of that. But Frank, it's good to see you.
Chuck, thanks for having me on. It's a lot of fun. Always great to chat with you. I always learn something. And thanks for talking about the book, about half memoirs, about half sort of political science. How does presidential power work? How does presidential speech making work? So half of it's sort of White House operations, half of it's my personal journey. You had a terrific foreword by a historian who noted that memoirs are sometimes the worst place to find out what happened in an administration, because I think he quotes Kissinger when he says that, everybody, when they remember a conversation, they always remember the great line they said. They never seem to remember the great line somebody else said on that front. No question. There's a lot of subjectivity. Well, I would tell anybody, read more than one biography, read more than one history. Don't just read one. I think I've got it, because there's slightly different perspectives, slightly a bit of a kaleidoscope in there. So you're absolutely right.
Well, I have found myself actually, I remember, and this is diverging a little bit, I've read probably 4 different books on the 1876 election, the great disputed election of the 19th century. And I've come to the conclusion that it's the politics of the author that shapes the analysis of that election. And I've read, like I said, 4 different ones where, boy, the facts all seem to be the same, but the takeaway is all been more about the author than about the times.
And back to modern era too, without a doubt, that is the single most common bias, that if you didn't really like John F. Kennedy, then your biography of John F. Kennedy is going to be pretty harsh. But if you thought this guy was actually pretty impressive, then you're going to be more disposed to applaud the guy. So there's always subjectivity in this mix.
But look, we're talking here on we're taping this. I want to timestamp it for folks so they know, on September 11th, Thursday, and it's 24 hours after the assassination of political activist Charlie Kirk. And Frank, your coming of age was with the turning point of the 70s, Young Americans for Freedom, and meaning that this was the heart of the Reagan movement. The college Republicans weren't cutting it in some ways, right? Young Americans for Freedom.
Well, I was with both. I enjoyed college Republicans, and it's just more movement.
Right. And I think that's the same thing today. Turning point is the movement. College Republicans a little bit more traditional, and you still sort of see that split. It's just that the Yaffers aren't as prominent as they used to be. I think they changed their name recently, if I'm not mistaken. But it's not lost on me that you start your book talking about January 6th and saying that it was a motivator for you to write about the Reagan era. Where are we as a country, and how would Reagan be handling this moment?
Well, I think there's been a lot of decay. I think there's been a great deal of deterioration in our political climate, both in our discourse. That whole Overton window had shifted, where now it's commonplace for national leaders to use really kind of insulting language or even swear words. Reagan would never do that. Reagan always tried to have an elevated discourse. Even if he was unhappy about something, there's a way to make a point, and start with substance, start with a particular point you're trying to make. And you could use humor and other elements to it, but Reagan kept a million miles away from denigrating anybody, even a longtime Tip O'Neill, somebody who was a longtime political adversary. Might tell a joke about Tip O'Neill or Ted Kennedy, but he would not ever stoop to insulting those people. So it's been a bit of deterioration in the last few years.
It's it's like we've forgotten how to debate. Everything is existential. I really do put the blame on our information ecosystem, that we've created an incentive structure that I look at one of the prime examples, my favorite new expression, and it comes from Scott Lincecum, who's a newsletter writer at the Dispatch, is nutpicking.
Yeah.
All right. You know where I'm going with this? Nutpicking, which is
you pick the most outrageous thing on the other side. Right.
And you say, look, this is what they're saying. Right. And it is really sort of how many of the biggest sort of left-leaning and right-leaning
No question.
influencers.
No
This is
question.
how they make their money,
But
right?
I think
And
you're
cable
vulnerable.
news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Social media rewards audacity, rewards outrageous statements, rewards in theatrics, rewards inflammatory statements. So it punishes a serious substantive conversation. I mean, Mitt Romney would have a lot of trouble getting a hearing, or Al Gore or Bill Bradley, if he said, here's some ideas on how to reduce the deficit. Boy, nobody's clicking on that. But if you
Right.
say nutpicking, here's the most outrageous thing that somebody on the other side said, and we all need to be emotionally outraged by it, then that's going to get some following.
And so it's this is one of those moments where I fear this is, there's the expression, things are going to have to get worse before they get better. And I fear things are going to get worse before they get worse.
It's always darkest before it's pitch black.
Right. The great
John
McCain joke.
McCain's statement. Yeah, I don't think we've hit bottom yet. But I do have ultimate faith in American people. And I do think what happens is a fatigue sets in of saying, okay, after you're emotionally
Exhausted.
spent and
Yeah.
you've radiated all of your hatreds and, but by the way, is there any idea about how to solve the deficit, or any idea about how to use tech to improve public school education, or any ideas at all that would make America a better place? But let's hear them. Let's have an avenue for airing some of these cool ideas.
So let's go back to your time in politics. What I love about your book, and I'm sort of is the fact that I feel like we've been growing a friendship over the years, but after reading the book, it's like I really know you now, and now I'm sort of like, hey, you don't know me as well as now that I know you. Like,
well, get your book out. Get your book out.
Exactly. You shared a lot. I'm curious, how did your family react? Did they see or hear things that they hadn't heard or from you before, or were these all old stories to them?
There were some polite groans, and I think it was more along the lines of we all sort of know this is true, or we've heard elements of this before, but would you really have to publicize this? Is this too revealing or too much information? And of course, that's a generational concept, meaning for younger people, you can talk about anything,
share anything. Yeah.
And there's no sense of inhibition. For our generation, there's a little bit of sense of privacy or the bubble or something. And look, I understand that, and I'm not by nature an exhibitionist or oversharing. But unless you give people a little bit of sense of what motivates you personally, and how I fell in love in college and I married my wife, and unless you tell people a little bit of your journey, it's harder for them to relate to what you're talking about. Then you are, forgive me, you are sort of being Mitt Romney or Al Gore, and you're just saying, let me tell you about the plan to balance the budget. Then nobody wants to read that.
No, it's funny you bring up Romney and Gore like that. I'd probably throw Bob Dole in there, where they all became more interesting after their campaigns.
That's right.
Like they all let their guard. It's like once they became human beings after they lost.
I think you're right. Everything is sort of a job interview during the campaign. Make sure you've got the clean shirt and the straight tie and formal answers, and it is like a job interview. But afterwards, you could say, I never really cared for that one individual, or that guy always drove me nuts. That guy never did the job he's supposed to do, and you can kind of share some of your. And I try to give some of that. I try to say I do have personal impressions of some of these guys, but the wrong way to do it is grinding an axe. If saying I'm here to settle scores, I'm here to take shots at people. I said I don't want to do that. I'm not going to mention anybody by name who I'm saying I had a problem with. And I'm just doing to illustrate color, illustrate controversy or differences. So I'm not trying to pay back or punch somebody in the nose.
Let me give you what I think is my most challenging political question for you, which is, what would the Reagan years have been like had he had full Republican control of Congress?
I think he would have been more aggressive and more successful. Aggressive in terms of his policy program. I think he would have been a little more successful. For example, I think the greatest point of policy frustration was more serious effort on the budget. And that is a tough sell, because you're taking something away from somebody. You're depriving somebody of some revenue program, grant, God knows what. And so it's immediate pain, short-term pain, and the benefits are only long-term systemic. The benefits are saying we're moving to a balanced budget, interest rates are dropping, the whole society's better off. But boy, that is a tough sell. So you really need to have congressional support and get it through at front end, so that within 2 or 3 years, people are saying, Reagan was right. We do have a better economy now because we made some tough calls a few years ago. We never really got there on the budget issues.
I say that because one of the things, and I guess it goes, and it's a question I've been thinking about making more of a constant question I ask of any elected official, which is, if you win an election 51-49,
Yeah.
What is your responsibility of governing for the 49?
You know what I would say? I would say you go as fast as you can on your agenda. If you believe in your agenda, you believe in your policies, this is you. The door is open. You won this thing. It's not a coalition government. There's no legal or moral obligation to say, well, George McGovern is actually 42% correct. We better listen to him. You won the darn thing, and you take it where you want to go. And theoretically, you're only following these policies that help the country. So theoretically, you've got an opening of 12, 24 months. And at the end of those 20 months, you say, see, I got through this. I got my program in. We're all now better off. So I would advise a president to move. If you win the election, you move along your policy agenda.
There's a reason results matter more than promises. Just like there's a reason Morgan & Morgan has become America's largest injury law firm. For the last 35 years, they've recovered $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. It includes cases where insurance companies offered next to nothing, short of shortchanging, seeing if they could get away with it. And Morgan & Morgan fought back, and they won millions. In Pennsylvania, one client was awarded $26 million. It was a staggering 40 times the amount that the insurance company originally offered. That offer, $650,000, whatever it took to sort of get away without paying. So with more than 1,000 lawyers across the country, Morgan & Morgan knows how to deliver for everyday people. So if you're injured, you're looking for a lawyer, check out forthepeople.com/Toddcast or dial pound law, pound 529 on your cell phone. And remember, all law firms are not the same. So give Morgan & Morgan a look. Their fee is free unless they win. Well, I hear you there. And yet I feel like we've gotten further away from governing for everybody and that we now only govern for our supporters. And that's been my concern. And I don't like, there's a fine line, that I'm trying to draw here. And so, yes, I agree in the macro, but take what RFK is doing with vaccines. The majority didn't vote for that.
Sure.
And so, and I think they're making a huge political mistake by essentially, allowing it to be seen as part of the agenda. I mean, I just think that it's potentially a huge political problem. Yeah. So my point being is that, I believe the last group of voters that decided this election weren't necessarily voting for, they were voting against. And to me, if you're governing, do you think about that or not? And if you don't, is that a mistake?
Well, look, this is a great topic to get into. I would just say directly, Bobby Kennedy is not qualified to be secretary, and he shouldn't be in that position. And his weird attitude towards science just sort of eliminates him from serious consideration. But so I would say that is a very different case than your general question about, do you have an obligation to listen to minorities or something?
And I may have taken the most extreme example, but it is in order to at least get people to understand the picture I'm trying to draw here.
Yes. But I think in general, political leadership moves as aggressively as they can toward their policy agenda within the political constraints they have. So Ronald Reagan needed to get a third of the Democrats to support his initiative. So he had to talk to them and had to listen to them, and he had to trim his tax cut ideas. And he got some support of Nicaragua, but he was eventually limited by the Bolin Amendment. So the point is, he had good news and bad news, good days and bad days, but he worked very hard across those 8 years to say, I need as much support as I can for my program. But meaning his constraints were the formal political constraints, not a thought of saying, well, some people disagree with me and some people think that. But I don't blame anybody in public life for pursuing their agenda. He ran on a program and he won, and he should pursue his program.
But I think about how Clinton and Reagan are portrayed now in history, not in the moment that they both governed, right? There was certainly that antagonism for both of them. And they both ended up, their legacies have benefited from the fact that the other party had some power.
Yes.
And it forced them to be a different kind of leader. I don't know what kind of leader Clinton is if he's partisan for 7 years. I don't know what kind of leader if Reagan is, if he's, you know what I mean? Right.
Yeah, but I'm saying your point now is accurate, but it's a very different point when you made.
I agree.
5 minutes ago, if you didn't have power, should you listen to the other guys?
Yes.
I don't think so. And now you're saying if you do have power, you got to listen. So Clinton and Reagan, you're absolutely right. Both had to trim their sails or adjust or accommodate some people on the other side. And it gave them some flexibility, and it might have actually helped them through the course of that. It allowed Clinton, for example, to always contend he was the good guy, so to speak, and Newt Gingrich is the villain of this story, even if it's a compromise.
Reagan pulled off the same thing, arguably.
Absolutely. So, and you're right. If Trump was reduced to sort of more of a rhetorical presidency where he was just angry and happy about something, but there weren't changes in vaccine policy or something, he might be more successful, because I think people to the extent Trump is popular, I think people like the idea of Donald Trump much more than they actually like Donald Trump as president. But they like the idea of a contrarian, or somebody shaking up the system, or somebody's kicking over established norms, is always kind of appealing. But then when he actually does it, you might end up worse than where you were before you started.
No, I look at it and it's like, why were there better memories of Trump 1.0 to some voters?
Right.
And I do think some voters are like, whoa, I thought I was voting for Trump 1.0, not this new thing. Right.
Yeah.
Type of mindset. And I think it's because there were some, and I guess the question is, and we're sort of dancing around it, which is most politicians only deal with the other side if they have to, not if they want to.
Yeah, I think that's the truth of life. By the way, I can't blame them. They did win the election. He's got an open door to do what he wants to do. And I'll say this, you can be happy about Donald Trump. You can be unhappy about Donald Trump. You really can't be surprised. When he says, I'm going to shut down the border, he shut down the border. When he said, I don't want to see men competing in women's sports, he doesn't want to see men compete. So you can't be surprised by any of this. He is a pretty consistent guy.
Since we're in the sort of that period of the Republican Party, earlier this week was the 51st anniversary of Ford's decision to pardon Nixon.
Yeah.
And I think has not aged. I personally believe it has not aged well.
Yeah.
That all of it, and for 40 years, the conventional wisdom has been, he put the country first.
Yeah.
But I could argue he actually put his own presidency first, right? Because a Nixon trial might have been consuming of his presidency. So let me ask you this odd question, in that if Ford doesn't pardon Nixon, does Reagan win the primary?
No, I don't think so. I think, by the way, all of the comments you were making about politics today, that deterioration and that polarization and the rancor, I think we would have seen that in the Nixon trial. I think half the country would have said, look, the guy resigned. The guy is destroyed politically.
Let it go.
Let it go. But there's a highly animated, energized sort of ideological group of saying, I hate Nixon. I just hate Nixon, and I live to hate Nixon, and I love hating Nixon. I'm going to keep hating Nixon. So you would have fed that flame for years, and I think we would have just seen a deterioration of the rancor. By the way, it's all conjecture, but I think Ford is best to say, look, this guy's been destroyed. He's been kicked out of office. History is going to be brutal to him, and let's just move on. Let's move on as a country.
So, but do you also believe that probably doomed his ability to win his own term?
Maybe. It certainly fell apart after that. He did climb out of that hole, and he was closing on Carter, as we know, was that last debate with his comments on Poland, inexplicable comments, but it was basically a tied campaign.
Yeah. My friend Doug Bailey contends he still blames Gallup. He's been no longer with us, but he blamed three entities for the 1 point loss. One was the Gallup poll on the Saturday before the election that showed Ford ahead. He goes, the minute the country saw that, wait a minute, Ford's going to win. No, we didn't want that. The second, that if Ford had been 1 point behind, then on election day, the second was the Dole gaffe, if Democratic wars, and then the third was the Nixon part. When you lose by a percentage point, it could be anything. But those were the three he always identified.
And I got to say, even though I think we're both probably of the same view of Jimmy Carter's limitations and sort of shortcomings as president, as a candidate, as a persona, he was fabulous. He was what
he met the moment. He was meeting the moment that people wanted. That we want to cleanse the country, right?
Absolutely. No DC connection at all. Sunday school teacher, Annapolis grad, to say he looks like the most pristine fellow we could find, and he's completely unobjectionable as persona. So let's just get in some guy from the outside and cut completely this whole Nixon Ford mess we've got and get the most different person we could find.
It's sort of where my head is at in 28. Like I do, like I'm wondering if that is the, as a Gavin Newsom thinks, going hard on this is the way to go, or a JB Pritzker, I look at the James Tallaricos of the world and go, and he maybe got the better message here, and he doesn't have a DC stain on him.
Well, one of the lessons to me is both parties have huge problem and a somewhat parallel problem in that their traditional pillar, the traditional rationale of support has significantly faded, meaning for the Democrats, that old economic justice or misery to say, look, that just doesn't motivate people in a middle class country the way it might have 50 years ago. So to simply say I'm Bernie Sanders and I hate rich people more than you hate rich people doesn't get you 50% of the vote. There's got to be some. The left will always have an element of economic, orientation to that message, but that doesn't get you above the Democratic base nowadays. So what else can you say running on the left that will allow middle America to say this guy, he's another Jimmy Carter, another Bill Clinton. Let's give this fellow a chance.
Mm-hmm. And what's the pillar on the right? You were saying both parties had
on
pillar.
The right. Actually, you made this point to be earlier. On the right, it's international stability. It's the Cold War international leadership to say the Republican Party was always the party of stability and sound international security. And to say, okay, but there's no immediate threat. There's no Soviet Union. There's no immediate problem. We just don't need to play that international role we've historically played.
So what would Reagan be doing right now with Putin in Ukraine?
I think he definitely would be pushing back. I think he would definitely be all during Cold War architecture and for a decade after the Cold War, simply having territorial aggression in itself was viewed as a warning sign. Not that we had to get involved militarily or support, but to say if you don't attach a cost to Putin's aggression, you are inviting more aggression. So you better make sure that the cost exceed the benefit. And by the way, the huge beneficiary of that would be U.S. and China, to say if you want to deflect China from any ambition in Taiwan, make sure Vladimir Putin has a bloody nose in Ukraine. Make sure there's a high cost of what he's doing, and China's going to be a little more subdued.
Well, look, one of the things that I actually would like to pivot our conversation to, because you're a former ambassador to Singapore, you've worked in Hong Kong, you probably understand the Taiwan situation. I just had a member of Congress on who just came from a CODEL in Asia and is really concerned that our weakness on Ukraine is only going to motivate China to feel as if, hey, if we go after Taiwan in 27, Trump isn't going to do a thing.
Yeah. Well, I'd say this. It's a variant of my comment a minute ago that any sense that the U.S. is not going to live up to its word or not going to honor security commitments or not going to attach a cost to bad behavior, any sense of that it's phony and empty, they're going to move. And by the way, we can go back to Putin's first grab in Ukraine, which was Crimea.
Right.
And whatever Obama did out of that, obviously Putin said, I'm empowered. I'm getting, it's not directly a green light, but it is a very clear statement from Washington that if you grab territory, the benefits exceed the cost. What Obama did, he had not sanctions on Russia, but there were certain citizens he put sanctions on in Russia. And then he said, we're going to boycott the Special Olympics with Sochi. So he said, we're going to boycott the Paralympics. And that was his cost he attached. So that's a green light to Putin. That's if you smash and grab territory, nothing is going to happen. So they took that as a big plus. So that was, to my mind, that was mismanagement. And I think Trump is piling on that. Trump is not interested in attaching a cost. At least you could say, to defend Obama, at least you could say, at least his rhetoric was critical of Putin. At least he said Putin is the aggressor here. And Trump won't even go that far. So I think we're in a sort of a long-term period of having our deterrence being called into question, and that empowers the malevolent countries, that empowers all these guys who are expansionist and are sniffing around for opportunity.
So if the Japanese, if the Filipinos, if the South Koreans sense that the alliance with the United States only will go so far in providing a check on China, how does that change their behavior?
I absolutely, it changes. I think everybody's got to trim their sails. Everybody's got to accommodate themselves to reality. And if they say the reality is the United States is not interested in leadership or cost or risks associated with deterring China, it's just too expensive for us, or potentially it hurts our trade. We just have no appetite for pushing back against China. Japan has to live with that reality. They can say we can't do it by ourselves, so we have to find some way to accommodate China or tilt a little more toward China. Korea, all the more so, since they have contiguous territory with North Korea. So everybody has to adjust if the United States leaves the room.
And that adjustment means a tad more accommodation to the Chinese,
a tad more accommodation to the Chinese. Absolutely. If they can't take us seriously, they have to take China seriously. So that's, by the way, you're just articulating the overall logic behind U.S. international leadership to say we are the indispensable nation, as that book title provided, and we can be part of any alliance architecture, but we've got to be there. We've got to be part of that conversation. We've got to have a mutual defense treaty. We've got to be willing to commit in case of war, and then that's taken seriously.
Look, I mean, I'm going into another part of the globe here, but there's a conversation going on with the Qataris wondering, wait a minute, we have this huge U.S. base and it didn't prevent our territory from being attacked. Like that is which is why apparently we're the U.S. right now is desperately trying to, calm the Qataris down. Which I sort of get, right? You make a deal with the U.S., you assume that provides some umbrella of.
There wasn't a mutual security guarantee with Qatar. It's not a formal treaty ally.
But they thought hosting our base was sort of the, well, they're not going to let anything happen to their base, so that should help us, right?
Yeah. You can tell I'm more ambivalent about this because I don't,
I am too. I'm not sure where to put the Qataris on here, and I'm a little uncomfortable
with. The Qataris themselves play both sides, in my view.
100%.
And Hamas is a terrorist organization. So
they were harboring them.
Yeah. Let's sit down with the Ku Klux Klan and negotiate. We would say, let's get rid of the Ku Klux Klan. We wouldn't say, let's sit down with the IRA, NORAID, and negotiate. We'd say the IRA is a bad organization and we ought to get rid of them. So,
but didn't they eventually sit down with the IRA? Didn't they
IRA
eventually?
Had a political wing. IRA had a political wing.
Didn't the U.S. eventually sit down with the Taliban?
Yeah. Now, was that wise or foolish? And is Afghanistan
I don't know either
or not? I think is an open question. But when we left, when the U.S. left Afghanistan, there were 8 million kids in school, half male and half female. Now all the females are kicked out after grade school to say, boy, that is not a step ahead. So we ought to look at the cost and the benefit of that withdrawal. Don't just say, isn't this great? Because we really empowered the Taliban and we really hurt a lot of people in Afghanistan we were trying to help.
Looking back when you were writing, look, every author you can't help but be influenced by the experience in the moment that you're having in a political moment, right? So, and I'm curious, I think there's a debate in conservative circles about whether Trump is an heir to the Reagan lineage or not. Yeah. What say you on that?
I think there's significant differences. There are a few similarities. I think both Trump and Reagan are sensitive to the size of the budget, and so smaller government is more helpful than a large.
All right, really, you think Trump cares about the size of government? I don't. I think he cares about strong government. That's an interesting. I don't know if I buy that. I think, but okay. I asked the question.
Look, I was saying, I think there are some similarities, but the differences are huge because back to that international leadership, Reagan believed in international leadership. Reagan believed that U.S. security, U.S. well-being is improved by having friends, having allies, having working relationships. Every ally and every friend is going to contribute a different amount and some will underperform. So there's always that burden sharing issue. But boy, how many friends do you want? As many as you can get was sort of Reagan's view. Also on trade, Reagan was a free market guy. Reagan said, whatever we can do to allow for prosperity, allow for economic growth, allow for people to get hired, businesses to grow, that's good. That's good. And the international dimension of that is very healthy for America, and it has security dimension as well. And Trump is just very mixed on that to say, I want to take shares. The U.S. government want to take shares of private companies. I want to grab revenue from private companies. And his view of trade is just puzzling about trade is fundamentally deleterious. Trade is fundamentally harmful to the United States. So I'm going to put a tariff on everybody. It is almost, Todd, I look at that and it's almost a Marxist critique of capitalism. Every single person is bad faith. Every single transaction is somebody trying to hurt you. There's nobody out there just selling us something that actually might help our economy. So everybody should be tariffed. Everybody is sinister. Everybody is harmful, and we need to push back against the world. Is a very odd way to go through life.
Well, this is what concerns me the most, is like when we decide we're going to be whatever benefits us and we don't care about the benefits to anybody else. Well, it's only going to encourage everybody else to think that way.
Yeah. And by the way, I think even that premise misstates things, because when Canada sells us inexpensive aluminum, that helps us. That creates more jobs. So it's not Canada's not tricking us. They're not cheating us. They're not lying to us. They're helping our economy. Something like 6 times as many people work in aluminum fabrication and use aluminum than manufacture aluminum. So they're giving us inexpensive aluminum. We're creating jobs here. So the premise of saying these guys are hurting us or cheating us by selling us something inexpensive is a faulty premise.
So talk about you were a pretty young staffer. Most Reagan era folks have a lot more gray than you do, although you've got the nice beard, going on there. Like I said, you got your Civil War beard going on, Garfield. You're an Ohioan, a little James Garfield there. But I've always said a White House is a young person's game. Like it's your 20s and 30s. Once you're in your 40s or 50s, you don't have the stamina, I think, to do it. So what was how often would you get time with Reagan? And how often did you get to be the staffer to show up in a room?
I can answer that at least partially with a pretty exact number, because I was in the NSC when Iran-Contra broke, and we had a number of then post-scandal sort of investigations, the Tower Commission, and there was an FBI investigation. There were at least, and then the U.S. Senate did something. So at least 3 sort of formal examinations about what was going on that year. And we literally, as an NSC staffer, we had to go and tally. So you must tally and delineate every single meeting you had with Ronald Reagan. In 1986, I had like 154 meetings.
So this is based on like an event, like you had to. Was it a subpoena?
Literally, I had to go. I spent like a day and a half going through my calendar. Right, this is before we had online stuff. I had like write all this stuff. Then you're submitting it to the FBI, but you're submitting it for testimony, so it's a legal document. You better check your facts and make sure it's correct. So I spent a lot of time with Reagan at the NSC. I was in the political office. Then after, I was director of the political office for the 87-88 cycle, vice president George Bush against Governor Michael Dukakis. And I was doing more, but less. I would maybe see Reagan once a week or twice a week. It was a lot less frequency in the political, because you were kind of much more outward facing. The NSC was kind of more inward management.
You didn't chalk up the less frequency to them sheltering him a little bit more, Duberstein and Baker?
No, I saw him a lot. Look, I was I was part of the family, so it wasn't like I was going to report.
No, right. Something. No, I know that, but like, just if they were just being protective of him, just generally.
No, there was the biggest time I saw that or close to that was we had there was a tumor found, I think, in his lower intestine after the 86 election, and it was about a 2-month recovery. And there was definitely a very managed schedule that he just had, he had less stamina for those 2 months, but he was back in the game. And I'll tell you, we saw this dramatically in 87. The final 4 months of 87, he was out there campaigning for Bush. He wanted Bush to win. He told me, I'm governor of California for 8 years, and we think we're moving the state the right way. And as soon as I leave office, Jerry Brown comes in and unwinds everything I've done. And I do not want to have Michael Dukakis come in and unwind everything we've done. So we've got to make sure that George Bush gets in there. So he was really committed, really excited, and hardworking on that race.
I gotta ask you, what was your reaction when you saw the news that Oliver North and Fawn Hall married?
Yeah, that was amazing. I knew Ollie and Fawn pretty well. I
mean, that must be tough on that family, right? They've probably been dealing with whispers for years, decades, and then you're like, "Gee, thanks, Dad."
It's a bit of a jaw dropper, but let me say this: I don't want to intimate anything inappropriate, because certain people have chemistry. Certain people have chemistry and a bond that does not involve intimacy, that there's some special moment. Both of them are in the foxhole together. Both of them are taking incoming. Both of them have legal exposure and possible
Right.
jail time. So if you've gone through that type of trauma, there's a bond. There's a bond. So I
Sure.
wouldn't necessarily assume anything beyond
Fair
that.
enough. Fair enough. But that was one of those you're like, wow.
It's a jaw dropper. It is a jaw dropper. Well, all we can do is wish him happiness. And, Fawn's husband, who passed away, was the road manager or the general manager for the Doors, the rock group.
No kidding.
So she was involved in Hollywood and rock music. And another interesting aspect to this that isn't widely reported is, and I worked with her. I knew her more than I knew Fawn. Fawn's mother, Wilma, worked at the NSC.
Oh, no
So
kidding.
it's odd to have sort of a multi-generational, but they worked there at the same time. But I knew Wilma and worked with Wilma more than I knew Fawn. I knew the mom more than the daughter. She was great. Wilma was great. Wilma was really good, really professional, worked for the National Security Advisor for Poindexter, then Colin Powell, so worked in a very senior spot, and was a top-notch professional.
What do you make of the of what's happened with the NSC and that it's sort of lumped in with Rubio? He's pulling the Kissinger, overseeing both, and based on your experience, how does that work? And is it do you think it's probably is more problematic?
Yeah, but my starting point is Trump is not foreign policy oriented.
Okay.
Trump is a transactional guy, not sort of an abstract person. Trump doesn't necessarily care if there's a geopolitical challenge to the United States or something's deteriorating someplace. I mean, that's Ukraine or probably Taiwan. That's not top of mind. He has not said anything negative about Putin since he's been president. He's not said anything really negative about Xi Jinping, except trade issues. Trade issues is the one sort of legitimate area he can.
But it's always my friend,
Yeah, friend. So the point is, my starting point is, look, this guy is not organized around what is America's role in the world and how do we push back against challenges and threats and how do we enhance our friendship and cultivate good relations with like-minded nations, the way most presidents would look at diplomacy or international relations. So I think what he's really saying, giving Rubio this extra job, is that it's just sort of a processing. It's a clerical unit. Somebody calls up, somebody needs to respond to the phone call. It's kind of 19th century foreign policy. We didn't really have a foreign policy, but if the Argentine foreign minister calls up, somebody's got to return the phone call. So it's a kind of a clerical exercise without any ultimate goal in mind.
So give me what the ideal distinctions between the National Security Council and the State Department were during your days and in your mind should be.
Well, the NSC works personally for the president as his advisor. So it's not responsible for broad U.S. foreign policy concerns. But what does the president need to know? So, for example, my job was presidential meetings and functions, outbound and inbound, meaning who should the president receive in the Oval Office and meet with and for what purpose? So if the Japanese prime minister is coming here in 2 months, what is supposed to happen when he meets the president? What accomplishment we want? What is our goal? What problem do we want solved?
You were part of this. I always try to tell people a lot of things are pre-cooked. You were one of those prep chefs, right?
Yeah. But also, that's the whole point of the meeting, is to declare victory and say we solved it. And the whole point is now we can talk to the Japanese foreign ministry and we can tell them, my friend, your boss is coming to see us in 2 months. Do we want to say it was a great meeting or do we want to say we missed the boat? Let's work for a great meeting. And here are the 3 or 4 things we think need to happen. By the way, they've got 3 or 4 things as well. But it's basically a positive relationship, so we ought to be able to work through most or all.
And it's your job to know what they want to, and you were to convey that.
Well, you're
all
literally
of that,
meeting with them. You're literally meeting on a regular basis, and even mechanical aspects. Are they having lunch or is it a state dinner? Are there other cities the prime minister is going to? Is the prime minister's spouse accompanying him? And is that person also making speeches or involved with the charity? So let's understand everything that's going on. Let's make this as successful as possible, and let's solve the 2 or 3 big problems we've got. Let's use this meeting. It's not a ceremonial meeting. It's to try to move our agenda ahead.
So in some way, if Trump doesn't really care about foreign policy in the way that, frankly, most other presidents of our lifetime have, then you might as well organize it this way. Fine, let Rubio do both. Yeah.
And I think what he is very sensitive to is simply how he's treated and is there respect or deference given. And if he is treated with deference, then it's almost like medieval Europe. It's almost like a medieval court where I don't care who you are. I don't care what you stand for. But as long as you bow before the king and say, Your Majesty, you're looking pretty good, you ought to have a few Nobel Prizes. As long as you say that, you're a friend. You're a good fellow. And if you say, Mr. President, I think you're going the wrong way, which Angela Merkel might have said, or Emmanuel Macron might have said, you are a troublemaker and you're showing disrespect.
You're a history junkie. Do you accept the premise that this wing of the Republican Party that's now in charge goes back to the 1920s and 30s? That's what that there's always been this sort of isolationist wing, sort of a protectionist wing, sort of however you want to describe it, because do you think that's a fair comparison?
I think it's hard to draw straight linear. I think you'd say these tendencies have existed in U.S. politics forever. Mm-hmm. There's always been something that's more nationalist, something that's more.
And sometimes this rises up in any country, including ours. Sometimes the nationalistic view is left wing. Sometimes it's right wing. Sure. And it always creeps into two things. One is anti-Semitism, and the other is, no matter which way it goes, is anti-Semitism, and then it becomes a bit more authoritarian if you're not careful.
And in the modern era, the more protectionist party were always the Democrats. They had the union base. There was the less.
I mean, my entire 20th century brain has been imploded, right? You have the Democrats are the free traders of you're like, what? Up is down, left is right, cats and dogs living together.
But there's a little bit of the conundrum for the Dems in 28, because on the one hand, they want to be anti-Trump and say Trump is really taking us the wrong way, which I believe is a fair hit. But on the other hand, they'll have unions and other interest groups that say, well, for God's sakes, don't unwind what he did. For God's sakes, keep it in place.
Well, let's go back to your home state. Like, I think Sherrod Brown is a flawed messenger for what the Democrats might need in 2026, because there are some of these tariffs he's in favor of. And yet, I think this is that the most vulnerable part of what's happening is on the economy and tariffs and, the cost increase on prescription drugs and on a cup of coffee and, all these things.
Right.
Is he going to be the best messenger for that?
No, look, he is, by the way, he is a bright guy. He's a sure-footed guy.
Oh,
nothing personally objectionable about him, but boy, he is old. And I don't mean just chronologically aged, but I also mean he is
just from an older era of politics.
I'll bet you there's nobody in the Senate today who's run for public office more times, not even Chuck Schumer, more times than Sherrod Brown.
Well, the only other person that comes close is the person he replaced in the Senate in Ohio, Mike DeWine. I don't know who's run more statewide offices, Mike DeWine or Sherrod Brown, right?
That's right. And each of them were in Congress, and Sherrod was state legislature.
He did it. Did they both were AGs?
Sherrod was like state secretary of state.
Right, secretary of state, and DeWine was the AG. I mean, they both lost races, multiple times, right? They're not. They're sort of. They remind me of. The sort of the boxers that weren't Ali, right? That every once in a while they'd get a belt, but they were always sort of like second, when the big guys came in.
Well, he has persistence. I mean, you're absolutely right. But hey, this is, I
think of them, both of them that way. Yeah. DeWine and Brown.
Right. Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. But I think though, cumulatively, that might be a negative or a challenge for sure.
I think so too.
How do I reinvent myself, reposition myself? I'm not the voice of the future, and if my heart and soul was sort of suburban left of center or the industrial workers, those are shrinking or shifting constituencies. And I'll tell you, any Democrat has to come to terms with some of the cultural issues that really sunk Biden. I mean, let me ask you this. How would you tell a Democratic presidential nominee in 28 to talk about border controls? Should they say, Trump made a good point? Should they say, I hate Trump? It's kind of your point on protectionism, but it's border. Don't they have to say, we need border controls?
Well, I think the issue the Democrats have, and they don't fully understand with swing voters, is there's a lot of Trump's ideas are popular. The tactics are unpopular, right?
That's
like nobody likes, we want the border was chaotic and we want immigration, right? Like, the thing is that that's America. Okay. Well, we are always contradictory on that stuff, but we want both things. We want order, right? We do want law and order, and we want freedoms, and we want
No, I was going to say, I think the voters will give you latitude on the second point as long as you pass a threshold on the first. On the first point, border controls, you've got to have credibility. You've got to say every country in the world decides who gets in. Every country in the world has the right to control its borders, and I will do that as president. So you've got to say, plant that flag, own that issue. Don't let anybody beat you up on that. Once you say that, now you have flexibility to say, well, by the way, how many immigrants do we need anyhow or want anyhow? And what criteria is a fair question. But you only will listen to that second question if you win on that first question.
I mean, it turns out those protests calling Obama deporter in chief in 2012 were probably gifts. It turns out those were political gifts because it told middle America, oh, well, he must be doing something okay there, or whatever.
Right? Soldier kind of moment, right?
Without him having to do it, right? They just sort of showed up and, I'm like, I'm going to listen to you, but,
Well, Obama had remain in Mexico.
Yes.
Right. Which, by the way, stands to reason that you should not benefit from a government policy while you're waiting to be approved for that policy. So it stands to reason that you should not be invited into the country while your application is in process.
Well, the fact is, this is how the Canadians work.
Yeah.
So you have to stay in America if you're trying to ask for asylum in Canada.
Well, a friend in Singapore told me if you took every single proposal of Donald Trump on immigration, top to bottom, every single thing he said, he would still be more liberal than any Asian country on immigration. So the Japanese, the Koreans, Singapore, all these guys say, look, we do not want you here unless we say it's okay. So there's no illegal immigration. There's no certainly remain in country. There's no catch and release, right? We are going to run a proper system and you only get in if we say you can get in.
So to go back to our sort of the question I had about, where is it the same family tree branch, Reagan and Trump, or not? Or is it a different, where does it differ? Where does it offshoot?
I think there's significant difference. And by the way, stylistic as well as substance. So Reagan believed in international leadership, believed in trade, and stylistically, he was an upbeat guy. Reagan was fundamentally an aspirational message, and Trump is fundamentally a grievance message. Trump is saying, I want to tell you what's wrong, and there are bad people out there trying to hurt us. And Reagan is saying, I want to tell you what's right and how we can make this country a better place. So very, very different psychology, I think, between those two.
What is conservatism today? Not, I guess, what is it to you?
Yeah.
And because just because Trump's for it, to me, doesn't make it conservative. And yet I watch the media now just lump whatever Trump's for. That's now what conservatism means. And look, the Heritage Foundation has really sort of warped my brain here because they're no longer ideological. They decided to go. AEI kept their ideological bona fides. Heritage did not.
That's right. And Wall Street Journals with AEI and National Reviews with it. So there are some traditional concern. To me, philosophically means ordered liberty, that people have as much personal liberty to live life as they choose, as they see fit, but it has to take place within some kind of societal norm, some kind of legal structure. So it's not anarchy. It's not pure libertarianism. But if life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, you get to live life on your terms as you see fit, as long as you're not hurting your neighbor. So that's the fundamental philosophical point, and that translates economically into market economics. If you want to start a restaurant, start a restaurant. You want to make shoes, go make shoes. You want to write computer code, God bless you. Do whatever you choose to do, and we hope you make money and prosper. And that's how society moves ahead.
What could Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan have done differently to keep this wing of the party from essentially overwhelming what was the Eisenhower to Bush consensus of conservatism?
Yeah, it's really striking to me that Trump was able to get control of the party so readily, so easily. And he is a terrific a showman, so to speak. He's got a great stage presence. He's got the angriest message around. But boy, there was zero government track record. There was zero sort of success. And there was a personal life that was incredibly controversial. I mean, you say nobody said, I want my kid to be like Donald Trump. So it was just astonishing to me that he pulled this off. And I think he even surprised himself. I think when he first ran, he said, I'm going to have some fun. I'll get on some debates. I'll yell at people. But
I thought it was a business decision at first. And I think he thought it was a business decision at first.
But look, I think that weirdness, if you will, embeds some good news, because the good news is our national political structures are plastic. They can be molded and shaped and deformed by anybody. So somebody who says, well, Donald Trump has now sort of permanently shifted U.S. politics, I don't think that's ever really true.
God, it never is.
Never true. The best guy in the room shifts it his way. And best, I mean best in a political messaging sense of that word. So whoever the next best person is will move it his way. And I suspect there'll be a little bit of a pendulum swing back, no matter how MAGA or anti-MAGA the next nominee is. He will not be Donald Trump.
You know, it's interesting. I always said that you knew Reagan won the argument when Bill Clinton stood up at a State of the Union and said the era of big government is over. It's sort of like it took, and it was I think the 95 State of the Union he said this. So this is 7 years after the Reagan presidency, right? And you're like, oh, Reagan won the argument, right? Like, do you say the same with entitlements? Like because I've always said the magic potion of Trump, right? Which was, I think he's got the presidency on culture, but in order to get there, he got there on entitlements. And it was sort of like, oh, Obama won the argument about government safety nets on healthcare. And then ultimately, that's how Trump was able to get so many of those Obama voters from Iowa and Ohio.
You mean by not taking on entitlements?
Correct.
Right. Yes, I think you're right. I think he also said, look, Reagan spent.
So basically, the era of big government is back. Sorry.
Well, although it's feudal. It's feudal.
It's a feudal government. Yes,
your
feudalism.
Political cost benefit is way out of whack. And what you do if you and I say, look, post office usage is declining every year for the last 20 years. Email and other alternatives, it's declining. Let's find the 5% of the post offices in America that are the least used, and let's close.
Good luck.
Good luck. You will spend 5 years trying to do that. You'll end up closing 6, and you'll save $100,000. So
but the political cost of that
cost is extraordinary. So there's an argument that Trump is saying, look, he understands cost benefit to say you're going to butt your head against the wall, even if everybody agrees we just don't need that kind of post office density in America. You're a fool if you go down that path. So just leave it alone.
Yeah, well, I still look at the post office. The fact that I can hand you a piece of paper and $1 and say, can you take it across country in 3 days?
Yeah. Well, I can do it. I can do it for $1 less than that with emails. My point. So I can save you $1. So
but I can't send my product there unless
Yeah, fair enough. Look, I wasn't saying destroy or blow up the post office.
No. I'm not going to.
You can adjust what the post office does. By the way, the way to do it, since we're on this, the way to do it is simply to pay the Americans, meaning don't go after a geographic locale and say we're going to Cincinnati and we're going to close your. Don't do that. But what we should say is, look, anybody who does not want postal delivery on Saturday and will agree for 1 year to forego that, we will give your household $100. We will pay you because that's
the financial incentive, right?
It's a financial incentive, and
that's Freakonomics. That feels like a chapter out of Freakonomics.
And at the same time, you tell every postal worker, yes, this will definitely decrease flow and decrease activity, but it'll decrease it, 2% a year for 5. So we're not going to fire anybody. We can guarantee you, no, it's all going to be attrition. So it's going to be peaceful shrinkage over 5 years. So you have to do things. But by the way, even if you do that, you say, how much money did I save for the U.S.? You say, this is a huge waste of time to do this thing.
But every little bit helps. I mean, but you get at something that I always try to preach on this podcast these days, which is I always say, people try to pigeonhole me as either a both sidesers or this, as a center. And I always say, look, you have to start incremental. I'm an incrementalist. I'm not a centrist or a moderate. I'm an incrementalist, meaning I'd love some big ideas, but I also know to implement a big idea, you got to do it
I'm absolutely with you. And by the way, somebody like Trump has no patience for that. Right. And there's no payoff in saying, let's fix this problem 3% a year or something. Right. It just doesn't get done. It doesn't get settled.
So is Trump a conservative? What is conservatism? Okay, but what is the future of conservatism?
No, but I think
where does it go?
But he rejects the exotic nature of some of the left. There's a cultural left, which is fringe, which is marginal on men playing women's sports and so forth, and he rejects that. So that's reassuring to middle America. That's not quite.
That's his unity. That's what glues his coalition together.
That's what glues it together. And by the way, the parallel question is: will the cultural left dominate the Democratic Party, or can a Democratic nominee push back against those? Now, Rahm Emanuel, in a radio interview, said that men should not play in women's sports. So he's positioning himself to be more acceptable. I don't know if any other Democrat has come to terms with that issue.
Gavin Newsom kind of did it.
Okay. Well, good for him.
On that. Well, I look at what Wes Moore, is doing with the with Baltimore, and he said, we'll surge resource. I find it interesting to watch Pritzker fight
That's right.
Trump tooth and nail on this in Chicago, and Wes Moore going, look, we don't want the feds here because that's gonna get in our way. Yeah. We're making progress, and I'm going to surge some more resources.
Yeah. I thought that was very wise of Wes Moore, very shrewd.
I did too.
And also, I mean, he's, without explicitly saying there's some validity to Trump's concerns, without giving Trump any credit at all, he's just saying, let me do it for you. So
this goes back to what we were talking about. Is like the public here is generally like, yeah, we agree that what he says is a problem is a problem. Yeah. We just don't like how, but I don't want the masked ICE agents. That's crazy. Yeah. Don't do that. Yeah.
I'd even go one step further. And The Economist called Trump's anti-crime policy sinister brilliance, meaning it's not just that he's tactically offensive. He is deliberately tactically offensive because it only really works if, if you want to say who is the least intelligent big city mayor in America, well, it might be Chicago. And this whole thing really works only if the mayor of Chicago gets up in arms and says,
I believe we're calling this nutpicking. Right? You go right. You pick the most extreme.
But the mayor of Chicago loves being the fall guy here. Yeah. He's playing to his constituents.
He's playing into it.
He's outraged, and he's saying you're being mean to me, and we'll never take it. And you can't trick me. And what did Pritzker say in his interview? All big cities have murders and a lot of crime. And I mean, just a dreadful response to
terrible
sort of apologize or deflect the fact. What is it? 7 people killed over holiday weekend or whatever it was in Chicago. So they're playing right into Trump's hands.
There never really was an heir to Reagan, was there? Like Bush ultimately didn't, he won because he was Reagan's VP. He lost because he wasn't Reagan. You accept that?
Bush had all sorts of strengths. Bush just had a really kind of an impressive guy, very serious about government, about policy, no scandals, no personal behavior oddness. So Bush was really a quality guy. What he didn't have is emotional connectivity with the electorate. What he really thought was the job of president is I'm going to handle the inbox, solve problems with the outbox. It was almost kind of a 19th century view of the office that saying we're not really in a communications age. All I have to do is be serious about my job, be honest and hardworking, and that's success. And I say, boy, in the communications era, you're missing a lot. You're missing a lot. So he really didn't. Reagan, with a Hollywood and radio and television background, just had an intrinsic DNA oriented towards communication, outward facing. And Bush just didn't have that. So there was a huge gap there.
So what do you make of this? Is there an heir to Trump, and what does that look like? Or is it probably similar to what
by the way,
there is no successor,
In 88 and even in 92, you had a lot of guys. Everybody was saying, Phil Crane said, I'm Ronald Reagan. Bob Dole said, I'm Ronald Reagan. Everybody. So
I grew up assuming Jack Kemp was the real heir, and I still believe he was the real heir to the Reagan.
Meaning, regardless of where these people really are in the MAGA spectrum, MAGA universe, you're going to have 8 people say, I am Donald Trump. I'm Donald Trump, but I feel it a little more this way. I'm Donald Trump, but this kind of, but so there's going to be 8 people saying I'm running as a mini-me, as an improved or variant of Donald Trump. There'll be a few people who say, I love Donald Trump, but we have to be post-Trump now. Trump was the right man for his time. But so that's kind of that's not anti-MAGA, but it's sort of a non-MAGA person. But, the one anti-MAGA person last time was Chris Christie. And I think he topped out at like 5%. And in the debates, he was pretty good. I mean, he's a smart guy. He's a serious guy in policy, but he ran explicitly saying MAGA is bad news. And he got about 5%. Then there were 2 or 3 people who were non-MAGA, Nikki Haley, Tim Scott. People said, I'm not really MAGA, but I've got some alternative ideas. And they topped out about 30%. So, and it was a MAGA party. It was a Donald Trump party.
No, there's no doubt that, if, I look back at the Buchanan challenge of H.W. Bush as sort of the first, that was the beta test of Trump, right? That was, and what did he get? About 30%. Yeah. And now we've almost seen it flip, right? What was 2/3, 1/3, sort of the more internationalist Chamber of Commerce wing of the Republican Party was 2/3 of the party. The isolationist, sort of protectionist wing was 1/3. Is it fair to say we've sort of swapped the spots? Is it that clean?
I don't know, Chuck. I mean, I've seen polls that say some 60+% of Americans and Republicans think tariffs are a bad idea. So there's deference to this guy because he's president. There's a willingness to indulge him as long as the economy.
You think free trade can come back in 2029?
I don't know if there's a reversal, but I'm saying people aren't necessarily endorsing or behind what he's doing. It's going to take political leadership to reverse this stuff. And you might have to look for something kind of clever, meaning just to say I'm for trade liberalization might not get anywhere. But if you said, for example, if we're serious about the environment, we need a U.S. EU electric vehicle free trade agreement. So we're going to do it just with EVs. We're going to do it just with Europe. And I'm saying Europe because the big problem on the left is always that labor or that wage rate that's saying you're secretly shipping jobs to Mexico and you're cheating us. And
but Europe is a little more equal on the wages.
Yeah,
right?
Germany's more expensive than we are. Nobody's going to ship a job to Germany to make cars. They're going to ship jobs here. So it'll reassure Americans there's not going to be job loss. It'll be efficiencies and economic gains out of it. But nobody's going to put up an auto plant in Germany because of. So look for something like that might give us an opening. There has to be an argument, a rationale beyond the pure economic efficiency that will allow people to vote for it.
Most people that listen to my podcast know that I am a part-time professor at USC. So are you. Welcome to the family here. Dornsife, and it's Dornsife is the school. I'm not yet ready to root for Trojans football. I haven't gone that far. I cannot do that.
And you being a good,
I know.
Sports campus, my friend.
It is.
You better camouflage your heterodox views. If you come here, you're going to get strung up.
But as an Ohio guy, I mean, you must feel a little bit of weirdness there. But it's a Big Ten school, right?
I've got to keep that quiet. And the test will come when they play the sport, when they compete against each other. But you're right. I've got to keep that Buckeye pedigree quiet. But I'll tell you this: it is wonderful to be here on campus, and there's an enormous amount of school spirit. And as we were talking earlier, it's not just sports, which is part of it, but there's an intellectual hunger here. People are trying to understand the world, where it's going, how they can fit in, how they can contribute, how they can benefit and get a job or make some kind of career. So it's great to be with this kind of environment.
I teach spring semesters. I don't teach fall semesters, but it is the spring semester. It's like a cleanse. It's like an intellectual spa day that you have because they're really, you're 100% right. I feel so much better. Every guest speaker I brought in will say to me, "Hey, thanks for that. It gave me a little bit of hope," And what I love about USC is that it's as bipartisan of a campus as I've come across in some of these places.
People are substantive. There's always questions there, and you're always being sort of challenged. But it's not adversarial. It's not hostility. People just didn't explain that.
It's a very diverse student body in all sorts of ways, socioeconomic and all sorts of ways. I want to leave. I've got a whole bunch of political memorabilia on the back of my studio. Are you talk about being a memorabilia collector in your book? What's your prized pieces? What do you still have? Do you still collect?
I collect episodically. I'm not going out to meetings like I used to, but I'll tell you two things I've got that I think are really nice gems. I have Congressman William McKinley's Congressional Handbook, the embossed Congressman William McKinley. He's my hometown guy from Canton, Ohio. So it's from his terms in Congress, his Congressional Handbook with his name in gold on the cover. So that's a lovely, lovely item.
It's a nice
to look at. And you go through and look at other members of Congress, and all these Civil War heroes. I mean, when he served, it was sort of a golden moment of excellence and talent in the U.S. Congress. So that's one item. The other item I've got the Chicago Daily News front section, Dewey defeats Truman.
A real copy.
That's the real copy. That's Smithsonian quality product. It's fantastic to have that. So that's great. And I have that on my wall in my home office. I'm here at USC today, but in my home office, I've got it on my wall. And it's a lovely reminder that we're all mortal. Bad news can happen any place. Twists and turns happen any place. So pay attention.
I did a speaking engagement at the Union Club in Cleveland. They have every pin from every governor that's run for.
That's fabulous.
They have a tremendous little and nobody cares about it. It's like stuffed in this little hallway.
I love it.
I'm like, it is amazing. The next time you get to Cleveland, I know you will. They have a terrific collection of just every Ohio Politico, and just like you just described. Not some presidential pin of McKinley's, but local office stuff. It's good stuff.
That's very cool. Good.
The book, it's a great read. And more importantly, you didn't load it up. It's not a PhD thesis on foreign affairs.
No. Keep it colorful. make a few points, keep it thematic, add some insight, and tell them something they didn't know. So that's what
it's worth your time. It's a Reagan biography written today, so you're using modern language, and you're at least, and I think sometimes that can make history a bit more accessible. And I think for anybody that's younger, for all my friends and family under 30, I've got quite a few, at least on the family side of things, that are budding political junkies and are looking to understand Reagan more. Guys, this book is a good read for you, and you know who I'm talking about. It's some of my nephews and cousins that listen there. Mr. Lavin, I always enjoy my time with you.
It's a lot of fun, Chuck. I always learn a lot talking to you. I'm glad we're both pulling for the Trojans in some form or fashion, maybe just in the class.
Fight on, my friend. Fight on.
Right. Fight on.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Chuck.
Thanks, Frank.